Hey my loves, welcome back. Or if we've never met, hi, my name is Ty. Today I'm going to show you every way to shuffle tarot, or at least all the ways that I know. And I thought instead of just demonstrating them all, I'm going to also talk a bit about the pros and cons of each method and why you might choose one method over the others, as well as touching on some controversies around shuffling, because believe it or not, shuffling can actually be a controversial topic. So if you're just starting out, hopefully this video can help you with choosing your shuffling method. And if you're a bit more experienced, maybe you'll hear some techniques or perspectives that you haven't considered before. So let's get started. So I'm going to go through a bunch of shuffling techniques and their advantages and disadvantages. And if I miss any, please let me know. Also, I'm not including shuffling machines or devices like that just because I don't own any, but it's worth noting that they do exist and they can be really important for accessibility, which is also a topic that I'll touch on a bit later. So the first technique is going to be overhand. This is probably the most popular shuffling technique. You can do this one, I guess you would say, long ways or short ways, holding on to either the longer or the shorter sides of the cards. Portrait or landscape, I don't know how else you would describe that, but I like to do it this way, long ways, I call it. And basically all you're doing is transferring cards in small amounts from your top hand into your bottom hand, which is, I guess, why it's called overhand. So you're just releasing a few cards at a time using your fingers and your thumb into your bottom hand. Just like that. You can get a little bit fancy and do some onto the back and some onto the front. It doesn't matter how many cards you release at a time. Sometimes it's one at a time, sometimes it's 10 at a time. It's a very sort of imprecise and therefore, I guess, pretty random shuffling method. And then it's one to that's quite easy to speed up. You know, you can start to go a little bit faster, which makes it a really easy one to get very meditative into doing. You know, you can just sit here and pass the cards over and over and over as many times as you like. Which does bring me to, some people like to do this a certain number of times, and that's something that most of these shuffling methods have in common. Some people will want to do, say, 3 times overhand. You know, shuffle the entire deck 3 times, once, twice, 3 times. Another number that's common is 7. It depends, you know, who taught you or what book you learned from or what deck you started from sometimes, as to if you have a particular preferred number. Other people just shuffle until they feel that they want to stop or until they get cards that jump out, which is something I'll talk about later on as well. So this is definitely a very kind of, you could say, versatile technique. One downside is that it can damage the edges of the cards because there's a little bit of sort of pressure and hitting of each other along the top edge a lot of the time as you overhand the cards, but you will also see that there's not really a shuffling method that doesn't damage the cards. I think any well-used and well-loved deck is going to get a bit of damage to it and get a bit scuffed up. I think that's just all part of the art of tarot. So a great one for beginners to start with, and also a great one that a lot of people continue to use all throughout their practice. Next technique is fairly similar to overhand, and it's called, forgive my pronunciation, it's called Mongean, which is where you're purposely taking just one card at a time from the top pile of cards using your thumb on the bottom hand. And what you're doing is you're alternating between putting them onto the front of the lower pile and onto the back. So one on the front, one on the back, one on the front, one on the back. And if you look up this type of shuffle, you'll find a lot of stuff to do with maths and probability, because there's, for instance, a certain number of times that you can do this particular shuffle in a standard 52 card deck, you know, playing cards, and it will return back to its original order. So it's a quite precise shuffle. It's not one that I think is actually very popular because, as you can sort of see, I don't do it very often, so I would be slow at it, but it's kind of slow. And a lot of the time you might not have time to sit here and one by one all of the cards in the entire deck. On the other hand, it can be a good meditative activity. Maybe you'd want to do this with a brand new deck that you just got, sitting here and getting a feel for the energy of it as you leaf through every single card individually. But it is not really a common shuffling technique. So our next method is going to be riffle shuffling. Now, I don't normally use this method. I'll say why in a little bit. So forgive me if it's not really the best demonstration of it, but essentially you're splitting your card deck into two. You're grabbing them at the top, using your back, first finger on the back, and using the rest of your fingers to hold the bottom of the cards. You've got a grip with your thumbs and your fingers, and then you're using that pressure with your forefinger to let them fold down and come together. So you can see then they're all, what's the word for that? Interleafed, I suppose you say. And there's another part of this technique called bridging, where it makes them fly together to bring your deck back together, but I simply cannot do that. Again, if you want to learn how to riffle shuffle, there's tons of really good videos on that. It's a very popular technique in casinos, you know, like with card dealers and that kind of thing. If you ever notice someone who does riffle shuffle their tarot decks, they'll tend to get a sort of like bent shape to the deck from always having that pressure applied to them. So again, a little bit of damage. On the other hand, it is apparently mathematically the most, I guess you'd say, randomizing way to shuffle cards using human hands. So if you like the riffle technique, it can be a really good one and a really good way to get your cards nice and well shuffled up. And also it's very appealing to look at. I'm definitely impressed whenever I see someone riffling cards. So if you are into sort of the visuals of your presentation as you're shuffling your cards, then learning to riffle might be for you. It's not for me. The reason it's not for me is disability. I, like a lot of people, have disabilities that affect my hands. So I'm not able to do this one. I will go a little bit more into disability later on in this video. But yeah, riffle shuffling can be a very good choice. That does bring me to the next method, which is washing the cards. I've heard this one called a lot of names. I've heard it called cosmic soup, which I love. I've heard it called stirring the cauldron. I also learned recently that it's called Corgi, which I think is just adorable. And it's pretty much, I would say, the most disability-friendly shuffling method, and also the most beginner-friendly. It's the easiest to learn, and all that it is using your hands to just mess the cards around on the table. Just swirl them around and mix them up. And you would just do that for as long as you desired. Could be a set period of time. Could be just until you feel the need and the pull to stop shuffling, as it were. And then you just gather them all up together and start to use your surface, your table, your space, altar, whatever it is that you're on, and get them all into line. So, now I did say that this method is probably the most accessibility friendly. There is that process of actually physically picking up the cards, which still does require some dexterity and certain, use of the hands that certain people, it wouldn't work for them. So again, what's going to work best for you is going to be individual to you. One thing about using this method of washing the cards, or cosmic soup, or whatever you would like to call it, is that it does create reversals. So if you like to read with reversals, this is great, awesome. They'll be just in there automatically. If you don't like to read reversals, all you'd have to do is just, as you're drawing your cards, turn them right way up. And just a word of caution with this one, you do want to make sure that whatever table that you're on or anything like that is really clean and really dry, because otherwise whatever is on your table is going to end up on the surface of your cards. I have a few that have, candle wax and things like that from doing this method on them that maybe I should have checked the table first. So hot tip there. Our next method is the pile method, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's that you're going to choose a number of piles, and I'm going to use 4 in this demonstration. And all you do is you take a card off the top of your deck, pile 1, pile 2, pile 3, pile 4, and you just keep going like this. So this one, as you can see, it is a little slower again, but it has a few advantages because it's very good for beginners, very beginner friendly, easy to learn. It is great for if you have a new deck or a deck that's made of cardstock where it's prone to sticking together. Because sometimes when you get a brand new deck of cards, a few of them will stick together. And if you just go ahead and overhand shuffle, those same groups of cards are going to kind of stay stuck together. So if you go through and pull them apart one by one to lay out into piles, then it's a good way to sort of A, get to know your new deck once again, and also B, make sure that all of the cards are apart and not sticking together. Another advantage that this has is, the reason why I've chosen 4 in this demonstration is that you can associate the number of piles to, numerology or other numbers that have meaning for you. Like you might be looking at 4 cardinal directions, and so you might have that as part of your sort of, mental setup as you're shuffling and placing your question and preparing yourself for your reading. You might be thinking, north, south, east, west, as you're going through and laying out your cards, associating to the elements that you associate with those. You just really personalize it to your practice. Another thing is the order that you pick up the piles in, that you could, again, if you're assigning them particular numerical significance, you can go 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can also pick up some of those piles upside down so that you get reversals included in your shuffle. The downside of the pile method, I would say, is that it's not very visually appealing, and especially if you're using a table like I am that's not covered in a cloth or isn't, a textile surface. It's slippery. The cards will slip against each other, especially if they're a particularly slippy cardstock. They don't go very neatly into piles. You can start to do it quite quickly if you get used to having them go a bit of a mess, but I'd call it imperfect. But it does have, pros and cons, like all the methods. Our next two, I would sort of refer to as like partial methods, you could say, because they're usually combined with other of the shuffling methods. So first up, we have cutting the deck, or the cut method. And all that is that you're placing your deck down and you're cutting it in half. So you're taking off 1/2 of the cards, approximately, and laying it down, and placing the bottom half on top of the top half. So the thing about this one is that, again, it's also flexible, and you can apply that kind of numerical method to it, where you might decide that you want 4 piles, so you cut into 2, and then you cut each of the 2 into 2. And then you might say, okay, I read with reversals. So you're picking up 1, you're inverting your hand, picking up the 2nd, and back, and so forth. So it is a handy way of adding in those reversals if you do read with reversals. As I said, it's often combined with another method. So oftentimes people will either cut first and then riffle shuffle or overhand shuffle, or the inverse of that, they'll overhand shuffle and then cut. It's quite often used by readers in person. So when you have a client sitting in front of you, it's common to, for instance, you do a bit of a overhand shuffle and then hand the deck to the client and ask them to cut it. And then these are the cards that you would pull, like based on where the client cut the deck. That's a very common way of using the cut method. So it's pretty classic. So finally we have fan, which is just fanning the cards. You would do this typically after one of the other shuffle methods like riffle or overhand. It's a little hard to demonstrate, again, on a hard table, but it's just getting all of the cards out into a fan shape. I've switched to a smaller deck here because, as I say, it's a little tricky on a table that's not a fabric surface because they slide around, but you just fan out all the cards and then select the cards from there. So this one, again, is very popular to do when you have a client sitting in front of you, because you can do the shuffle yourself and then fan out the cards and ask them to choose which cards appeal to them. They might want this one. If you're reading for yourself, I suppose you could also use this method, but I don't think it's super commonly done, that you would fan out the cards in front of yourself and then choose them out that way. But again, give it a go if you've never tried it. See if you like the way that it feels, the way that the results that it gives you, and try it out. So I want to just quickly touch on this question of when to stop shuffling, because regardless of what shuffling method that you use, you're going to kind of want to know when to stop. So there's essentially three main ways, and they are number, intuition, and jumpers. So going by number is going to be that you have a predetermined number of shuffles that you want to do. So it might be that you want to overhand 3 times. It might be that you want to riffle 7 times, but it's that you've decided it before you go and do your shuffle. So then you have already planned out exactly how many times you're going to shuffle, and then you know exactly when to stop. The second way is almost the opposite of that, and it's just by feel, just by vibes. Just you shuffle and you feel when to stop. Which this one can kind of trip up new people a little bit if you're not used to, using that intuition muscle. But it is, I think it's like a muscle. The more that you use it, the more you get used to it. So definitely worth a try, I think, just seeing when some people describe it as a pull, like they'll feel their hand wants to stop shuffling, or they feel somewhere else in their body or energetically. It depends, completely different for different people, but if you've never tried just shuffling until you feel the pull, give it a go. Could be the method for you. And then the final way is jumpers, which I will go into more detail a little bit later, but it's basically just jumpers or flyers, some people call, which is when cards come out while you're shuffling. So when a card sort of jumps out of the deck while you're overhand or riffle or however you're shuffling. There are some methods that don't lend themselves to this. Like if you're washing the cards, for example, it's pretty uncommon for a card to turn itself over while you're just, flat moving all the cards around on the table. But if you're overhand shuffling, I find I get jumpers quite a lot. So that's also another way of knowing when to stop shuffling, because that's your card. Those are the cards that you're reading if this is the method that you're using. I do recommend that you decide beforehand whether you're going to take those jumpers or flyers, or whether those are going to be not something that you use in your practice, because it is a little bit of a contentious topic, and you don't want to be, caught off guard when you're shuffling and a card jumps out and you don't know whether you read those or not. So have a little think about it before you start your shuffle. So now that we've covered all the shuffling methods, how do you choose between them? How do you find what works for you? Some people learn one method when they're starting out and they just stick with it the entire time, and that's totally fine. It could be, from your teacher or from a book that you learned from. However you learn the tarot, if you land on the perfect way for you straight away, that's totally okay. But there are a few other factors and things that can go into the decision, actually, of how you shuffle. So the first thing that I want to mention is disability. Some readers, myself included, have disabilities or medical conditions that affect how we shuffle. So I personally have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS, and that causes me pain, weakness, and dislocations in my fingers and my wrists. I'm also autistic with bad proprioception, so there are methods where I just don't have the coordination to use them. There are other common reasons, which might be things like arthritis, low vision, limb difference, just basically anything that affects coordination or how you use your hands and your arms. So the best shuffling technique is going to obviously differ for each person, and I just want to make the point here that if you ever see someone shuffling in a way that you think is strange, they could have disability-related reasons. So don't be too quick to judge. Now, something much less serious, cardstock is going to make a bit of a difference into what your chosen shuffle method is going to be. So there are some cardstocks that are very, I'm going to say sticky. they're inclined to stick together. So for instance, with this one, a lot of these cards, you can see they form little groups together. So if I go to just overhand this, a lot of those same groups are gonna stay stuck together. So you're not gonna get a very thorough shuffle just by doing it that way. So whenever I have a deck like this, and oftentimes it's happens with a new deck as well, you might wanna firstly just bend the cards a little bit either way, just to crack them and get them to separate that way. But secondly, start pile shuffling them. Just get them out into piles, because that's going to help to separate out each of those cards. The next sort of cardstock issue that you might encounter is cardstock that's very slippery. So I have this nice kind of shiny holography looking deck, but it's very, very, very slippery. So any type of shuffling tends to go a bit of a mess, a bit faster than I would intend. And if I try to, for example, pile shuffle these, they're gonna just slide around and jump off of each other. So very slippery cardstock. Your best bet is most likely going to be overhand shuffling, but in as controlled a manner as that you can, because just with the expectation that they might go everywhere, or else you might want to just wash them. So overall, you might need to vary your technique based on the cardstock of the deck that you're using. So the next thing that's going to make a difference is the size of the cards that you're using. For example, very small decks, I find even harder to riffle shuffle, just because you have a bit less space to do everything in. So it's a little bit harder to do as precisely. Very large cards are also hard to work with. And for instance, if you try to wash these, you're going to need a really big table, a really big space area in order to be able to do that in an accurate way. And then no matter the size of the deck that you're using, the actual size of your hands is going to play a big role as well. Because, for instance, I'm very lucky. I have long fingers, so I can hold most decks lengthways like this. But I know a lot of people who can't because their hands are much smaller. So they might try, if they want to overhand, they might do it along the shorter way so they don't have to stretch their fingers as far. Or they might try a different technique that doesn't require as big of a grasp of the cards. And that's really common as well. I know we frequently see just the example of a person shuffling like this. But if you can't do that, don't be disheartened. There are so many other ways that you can figure out that are going to work for you. Which does bring me to trial and error. So when you're starting out, sometimes the best thing is just to practice and try every possible method. See which ones work for you, which ones feel the most physically comfortable, and which ones lead to the best readings. When I started out, I tried really, really hard to learn to riffle shuffle, and I just could not do it. And it was only after trying all of the other methods that I've shown here that I figured out what works for me. Finally, there is tradition, and this one probably causes the most controversy. If you've been in tarot spaces for very long, you've probably heard of 7 riffles, which is a piece of advice that gets given to beginners quite a lot. It's, riffle shuffle the deck 7 times. And it kind of gets given uncritically. No one ever says, why? Why are we doing it that many times? Did you know it comes from casinos? So in a lot of casino games, the deck is riffle shuffled 7 times because that's as close to true randomization as you can get. So it's mathematically valid, but it doesn't have to be adhered to dogmatically, especially for a practice like tarot, which is not a casino card game. It's something different for most of us that are doing it anyway. So in spite of the, I suppose you'd say, flexibility and diversity of tarot practices that exist in the modern day, there are a lot of people who insist that there's basically just one right way of shuffling. What do we say to those people? We say absolutely nothing because that opinion is not worth the time of our day. There is no one right way to shuffle. And that doesn't stop people from criticizing the way that other people do it. Like, the criticism that I've seen that's in vogue right now is to deride what they'd call messy or lazy overhand shuffling, especially if the reader reads jumpers. So this is one of the most, I suppose, controversy-causing or argument-causing sort of topics I've seen in tarot spaces, and that is whether or not to read jumpers or flyers, which are cards that fall out of the deck as you're shuffling. And it's become a bit of a sort of like a rage bait or, like argument starting topic in a lot of places. People complain that it's trendy to read that way and that it's untraditional and blah, 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 blah. And I have to wonder, like, who's forcing them to keep watching? Because if you don't like a reader who reads jumpers, don't go to one or don't watch one. It's such a two types of people thing for me. It's like if you see someone that's shuffling in a way that you don't like, are you going to A, just acknowledge that you don't like it or don't understand it and move on with your day? Or B, go complain about it and make sure everyone knows that they're doing it wrong? Yeah, like, why start a controversy about it? But yeah, there you go. The way that you shuffle can be controversial. But once again, I'm going to reiterate, there's no wrong way. If you read jumpers, wonderful, fantastic. If you do not read them, also wonderful and fantastic. As long as you know why you're doing what you're doing and what your theoretical basis for doing what you're doing is, as long as it makes sense to you, then it's the right way. Which brings us to, how do I personally shuffle? So there are a few specific situations in which I use specific shuffles. One is when I get a new deck. I do like to do a pile shuffle first, just to make sure none of the cards are sticking together, and also to get in that first, sense of a feeling of what the deck is like. And I also do pile shuffles on certain of my decks where the cards are just like made of a really sticky cardstock, just to make sure none of them are stuck together. If I'm ever cleansing a deck, that's when I like to use the washing or the cosmic soup technique, because I think it works sort of, thematically, washing, cleansing. And then also because it makes it easy to put smoke over the cards. I just think that works really wonderfully together, get it all cleaned and cleansed and then shuffled back together neatly. But outside of those specific times, the method that I use is basically 2 cuts, 1 inversion, loose overhand. So that is 2 cuts being 1, 2. So I make 3 piles. 1 inversion, so invert and back. So one of these piles now is inverted. And then loose overhand. I am one of those people that reads jumpers, as if you couldn't tell from my impassioned defense. So I basically just, once I get to the overhand portion of my shuffle, I will sit here and meditate on what I am asking or what I'm thinking about, what I want to be the topic of my reading, and I will just loosely shuffle until whatever needs to come out, comes out. I also oftentimes use the bottom of the deck as a bit of a, thematic inclusion. But that is how I shuffle and draw my cards. Pretty variable, bit kind of loosey-goosey and vibes-based, but that's the gist of it. So I think that covers pretty much every way of shuffling the tarot. Let me know if I missed any. And I would also love to hear in the comments how you shuffle and why you do it that way. Do you have a particular tradition that you follow for shuffling? Have you just always done it that way? Do you incorporate numerology? What techniques do you love or loathe? And do us sloppy shuffling jumper readers deserve so much hate? I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then I would love a like. Feel free to subscribe if you're not already. And if you are, thanks. That's very cool of you. Take care and happy taroting.